We're going to start looking at the New Testament. It's only taken us about 6 months to get here. We're going to look at the Gospels first. So, I hope you all are ready. Most of you have had this before, and we actually have gone through this once already. So I am not going to spend a lot of time going through the different parts of the New Testament. But the New Testament is made up of 27 books. There are the four Gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. And then you have 13 letters that are associated with Paul, like 1st, 2nd Corinthians, Romans, Timothy, Titus, books like that. Some were actually written by Paul, some were not. Then you have what are called the Catholic letters, and there are 7 of them. The reason they're called Catholic, as we've learned before, I think in this class, is because that Catholic means universal. So they're not written to one particular community or one particular church. They are written to the whole church. And then you have the final 3 types of books in the New Testament that simply fall under other. Revelations is what's referred to as apocalyptic literature, which we will get to later. Hebrews is a homily that was written down, and the Acts of the Apostles is simply the second half of the Gospel of Luke, and it is a narrative. Okay, let's get to what I really want to cover today, and that is the idea of the 4 Gospels. You have 3 Gospels that are very similar: Matthew, Mark, Luke. These are referred to as the Synoptic Gospels, simply coming from 2 Greek words, one meaning same, one meaning optic, so they provide the same view. The 4th Gospel is the Gospel of John. It is unique unto itself, and therefore it is separated from the Synoptic Gospels. So you have 2 types of Gospels: Synoptic Gospels and then the Gospel of John. So, just to clarify a little bit about the Synoptic Gospels, they are essentially all written within a straight narrative style, so they tell a story. Also, they all have a similar timeline. Jesus' public ministry in each of the Synoptic Gospels lasts 3 years. They also tend to have a lower Christology. Don't worry if you don't know what a Christology is. We will be going through this. Mark has the lowest Christology, and then Matthew and Luke both have higher Christologies. The other thing is they all have similar stories. So the stories they tell within the gospel are all similar to each other. So that's why they're referred to as synoptic. They have the same view. The Gospel of John, on the other hand, is different. It is not written in the same way. There is narrative style, but it's also somewhat poetic and theological language, higher theological language. The timeline in the Gospel of John is different. For John, Jesus' public ministry only lasts about 1 year. Also, the Christology in John is different. It's higher. Jesus appears to be a much more divine figure. The other thing with the Gospel of John is that the stories are completely different. You have stories like the wedding at Cana and the raising of Lazarus. These stories do not appear in the Synoptic Gospels, so we have different stories in John. Now, one of the things that comes up is what's referred to as a synoptic problem. But before I get into the synoptic problem, I'm going to have some breakfast. So hang around for a minute. When you're thinking about the synoptic problem, it's kind of like everything going into the pan for breakfast. So, I'm going to start with some mushrooms. So I'm going to make scrambled eggs. The first thing you have to do is add the mushrooms. I'm going to cook them up. Now that we have the mushrooms all cooked, we have the first ingredient in the Synoptic Gospels. We'll call the mushrooms Q, which we'll talk about later. It simply means source. You have to add your second ingredient that made up the Synoptic Gospels, the eggs. We'll call the eggs the Gospel of Mark. Don't worry if you're not getting this. I'll explain it all in a little bit. So we've got eggs and we have Q mixed in there right now. We have Mark, we have Q. We have eggs, we have mushrooms. Okay, so in figuring out the synoptic problem, we've got to figure out where Matthew and Luke got their source, got their information. So we've got Q and we've got Mark. We've got the mushrooms and we have eggs. There's something missing from this breakfast. Just a second, I know what it is. Bacon. Can't have a breakfast without bacon. Think of bacon as the third source of Luke and Matthew. It's their own oral tradition that was unique to them. So now we've got Matthew and Luke. It's a mixture of Mark, what we call Q, and then their own oral tradition that was unique to each one of them, each one of Matthew's or Luke's Gospels. Now I'm going to eat my breakfast. Don't worry if you don't completely understand the synoptic problem. We will be going through it on Monday. Monday in class, we will go through it and I'll explain it further. For now, there's a short quiz on the classroom page. Just answer those questions and turn it in. Have a good weekend. Everything will be due by 8 p.m. tonight. Come back Monday a better person than you are today.